A son's first hero, a daughter's first love. It was a glorious day in the Black Wildwood, as King Natian enjoyed his usual routine of escaping from the boring chores of ruling an empire at war with its neighbor to the north. The responsibilities of being a king and a father were particularly problematic, as many of the decisions a powerful king made in his duties were in dramatic contrast to the traditional and loving guidance of father. Natian felt free from all this now, as he sat on bended knees and meditated in the beautiful, luxuriant emerald meadow nestled in the center of the Black Wildwood. His eyes were closed, as the sun beamed harshly on his face. But he didn't mind. His cheeks had already begun to run reddish pink, and his skin was hot to the touch from the brilliantly sunny day. Natian had been emotionally moved by the promise of great things as he awoke at sunrise, and began his trek in solitude to the very spot where he'd once seen Shayla practicing with a young servant. This was where he later witnessed the servant's inestimable skill, even as he marveled at the immeasurable beauty of her richly dark skin. Today was a day when anything was possible, and King Natian sat motionless in the center of the meadow for 3 hours, fully expecting the impossible. Soon he would endure the long horse ride back home, but he considered the warmth of the sun one last time before a dark shadow moved in and towered over him. Natian didn't flinch as the dark shadow blocked the blazing sun as it hung high in the sky. To the untrained eye and undisciplined spirit, the darkness would have been cause for alarm. Natian had spiritually transcended the most basic elements of fear and uncertainty. He was never moved by events, only by the resulting reaction. At this time he chose to remain still and embrace the darkness as much as he'd embraced the sun just moments earlier. Finally, as the skin on his face began to cool under the shadow's cover, Natian opened his eyes. His face beamed as much as the sun shone brightly. His eyes were wide with cheerful recognition as he saw Damarie standing before him. Today was 2 weeks to the day that he'd made an offer to teach her the true origin of her style of fighting and sword mastery. Today was the day of impossible things, and the very improbable had happened. A servant child from an enemy kingdom would become the student to the king of an opposing empire. Damarie was covered, as always, in her cloak and veil. To Natian, there was nothing about the person before him that remotely resembled the angry and confused servant who decimated tree trunks at the edge of the meadow a fortnight ago. He could not see a sliver of the coffee-colored skin that brought him wonder, or the bright, innocent eyes that gave him respite. Damarie's earlier anger had freed her from emotional shackles that bound her, making her a marvel to behold. Now she had regressed into the lowly place of doleful and overburdened servant. A servant is not a student, Natian thought, as Damarie kneeled in front of him. It was a submissive but respectful gesture. Natian would endure none of it. "Damarie," he said sternly, "it is an honor to be your teacher, but there can be no masks between teacher and student." Damarie's hands instinctively went to her hood, but then her mind began to wander. Fear caught in her eyes as she wondered about Kalen and his threat of further punishment. Then her eyes locked with Natian's. His eyes were reassuring and peaceful, but that was not what changed her mind. As she gazed into his eyes, she was reminded that Natian was a king. He would not tolerate anything less than what he specifically demanded. Like any king, Natian was all or nothing. He demanded complete obedience or delivered spurning. However, unlike Kalen, Natian offered a reward for her complete obedience. Damarie stood tentatively and slowly removed her hood. Next, she tugged down on her veil until her dark bronze skin, almond-shaped eyes, and full lips emerged before Natian like a magnificent flower blossoming above the rich earth. But something caught Natian's attention as Damarie looked away. Natian noticed she was trying to hide red, swollen eyes. When he took a closer look, it was obvious that she'd been crying. Natian instinctively opened his arms. It was a warm, inviting, and irresistible gesture. Damarie fell into Natian's bony chest without hesitation, tightly embracing his thin frame. She dug her face into his shoulders and let out a loud and mournful wail as she began to sob. Natian provided the connection and the release that she needed. Natian made an assumption that he knew to be true, This young, beautiful, gifted woman had never cried in the presence of another man. He felt honored. He was the first man to ever fully see, feel, and hear Damari's emotional expression. He held on to Damari as tightly as she gripped him,